Okay, so I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have known Bonnie a lot longer than I have, and she really doesn't need much introduction with you. But for those on the Zoom who may not know her so well, Bonnie Ruth Strickland is an amazing woman. She was born in 1936 in the South during the Great Depression to a poor family with deep Confederate roots. Bonnie was also born with a thirst for knowledge and a strong will to succeed. She instinctively knew that an education and hard work would lift her from the muck of the redneck Riviera. In fact, her thirst for knowledge and success brought her to prestigious positions in the administrations of two major universities, Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. How she got there and the struggles she faced are all in her just released memoir, Leaving the Confederate Closet, A Southern Lesbian's Journey. What makes Bonnie amazing is that she turned every single struggle into a success. In the book, she tells us why she turned her undergraduate degree in physical education from Alabama College into master's and doctoral degrees in psychology from Ohio State University, and how she used her position in the American Psychological Association to advocate and win LGBTQ rights inside and outside the APA. Bonnie's publications, awards, and recognitions are many. Most notable is that she was president of the American Psychological Association and a founder of the Association for Psychological Science. In 2014, Bonnie was presented the Gold Medal Award for Life Achievement in Psychology in the Public Interest by the APA. I had to tell you all this because of all the things Bonnie is. At the top of the list, she is extremely modest. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome this amazing woman, Bonnie Strickland. You're up, Bonnie.
Okay, well, thank y'all so much for being here. It feels like a grand reunion, and it is for, as I said, for some 50 years for the old Emory folk. So I'm just delighted. So many of you read parts of the early writings, parts of the book, and gave me feedback, and this was all very welcomed and very, very helpful. I try to note some of you, at least, in the acknowledgments. The other very helpful events for me were taking seminars in our Learning and Retirement, college Learning and Retirement program. These seminars were called Writing to Remember. And none of us were really experienced writers, but we wrote mostly of personal events in our lives, and their feedback was essential for me, and again, very welcome and very, very helpful. As a university professor and clinical psychologist, I was used to writing research articles, but these are very technical and have an arranged format, and no personal data is ever included. So I did delve into some autobiographical writing some 30 years ago, and I shared some of this with a good friend and professional colleague, Bev Green. She was visiting here in Massachusetts from her home in New York. Well, she took a manuscript on the train with her back to New York, and the next thing I know, to my surprise, she published the writing. So that was my first foray into autobiographical writing. So I've been working on the book for a long time, and I'm just delighted to have it published. I'm particularly grateful to Bridget Sandberg, whose thoughtful editing made the book even more, well, she brought great improvements to the book. And then I handed the manuscript to Cindy. She continued editing, formatted the pages, designed the cover, secured the ISBN number, published and promoted the book, and completed all those general and technical details that bring the book into existence. She planned this Zoom meeting and went through any number of bounce back emails to make certain that folks got invitations. And she is, of course, our moderator. So Cindy's the reason you and I can hold the book in our hands today. Yeah, Dusty actually introduced Cindy to me, and it's one of the best things that ever happened. So I'm going to read some excerpts. I'm going to start with the prologue. And see if I can hold it up here and get my flag out. A small tattered flag sits on my desk where I see it every day. I've had it since my high school days, but I'm not sure why I keep it. Perhaps it simply reminds me of where I came from in the long journey to where I am now. I expect the reasons are not that simple and are as complex as the Southern culture that spawned me. I grew up in the South, torn across boundaries of black and white, male and female, pride and shame, hospitality and hate. In childhood, my brother and I would spend summers at my maternal grandparents' farm in the northwest panhandle of Florida. They lived close to the Apalachicola River in a small rural community called Dalkeith. Our lives revolved around water. Dalkeith was less than 10 miles from the Gulf of Mexico, and occasionally some of the grown-ups would drive us as many cousins as were around to the beach. The sand there is like sugar, fine and white. There were few homes or buildings on the beach in those days. We usually had it to ourselves. We would paddle around in the surf and scamper through the bays, feeding for oysters with our bare feet. We would float face down looking for scallops. Finally exhausted, we would head back home. The times I remember best were middle childhood when I spent long, lazy days alone in the river swamps. I would walk down barefoot on the hot sand down a sandy path to the water, slapping the ever-present mosquitoes. I would pick blackberries warm from the sun and eat them along the way. There was always an extra boat, a flat-bottomed bateau at the landing. I would carefully settle a .22 rifle in the bottom of the boat, along with a tangled pole and some worms. I would fish a little, but mostly I would float with my fantasies. I would watch the sun slant through the Spanish moss into the murky water, lighting the dust motes as they danced like golden flakes. Jesus bugs walked on the water, bees swarmed around white blossoms, long-legged cranes and herons scattered through the palmettos, dipping their beaks for the fish. Lazy turtles sunning themselves on fallen logs. I knew every slough and waterway. I daydreamed that the cypress knees and tupelo trees were ornamental hedges on the liquid lawn of the house that I would eventually build. All of my uncles built their homes near the river. I assumed I would do the same. Like them, I would live off the land, well, at least the water. Life was simple, and I was involved in every aspect of the ordinary. I remember steering my Uncle Jennings' pickup truck on the dirt road in front of his house. The metallic taste of water from the dipper in the kitchen, the briny smell of the smokehouse, the oily scent of the kerosene lamps, the almost overpowering bug spray, and the faint stench of the hog pen from across the yard. I recall turning over in bed to face the feet of a cousin, since we slept head to toe. I remember the hot sand in the front yard under my bare feet, and the women folks sitting on the porch, shelling beans, getting ready for supper. I was at home in the peace of being securely in a place where I belonged. So moving up into my teens, I read everything that I could find on homosexuality. There was not much available except passages in the Bible, which were no great help. From there I learned I was doomed to hell. I did read The Well of Loneliness with its sad ending and one or two of the Anne Bannon lesbian novels. I was intrigued by the stories of Christine Jorgensen and Jan Morris, who had undergone sex change surgery. I knew that I was different somehow, but at that time was not at all clear about my sexual preferences. Outside of school, I found some women's basketball and softball teams and played on those. They gave me a great sense of fun and belonging. I thoroughly enjoyed the women and girls that I was playing with. I loved the uniforms and the competition. We were young, and I suspect that many of my acquaintances were budding lesbians, although it was never discussed. One of my good friends was Evelyn Creamer. She and I played on a pickup softball team together. Once we were traveling for an out-of-town game, we stopped and picked up a new player, Joy, a pitcher. I'd seen Joy once before on an opposing team at one of our games, but I didn't really know her. We traveled 6 in the car, 60 miles to our game. Joy pitched, and as usual, I was the catcher. She had such a hard, fast pitch that I put a handkerchief in my glove to soften her pitch. I do not remember whether we won or not, but I do recall that somehow I maneuvered my way into sitting beside her on the way home. The radio was on. The announcer was giving the results of the Alabama State tennis tournament that had been played earlier in the day. I had won the doubles championship with Ruby Mays, a girl from Mississippi. The announcer mentioned my name to the great surprise of the folks in the car, since I had not told them the results. Joy said we really needed to celebrate, and I invited her home with me. First, Joy and I put on some records and danced. This was the first time I'd ever danced with a girl, and maybe the first time I'd ever danced at all. I liked it. That night became a Printless phenomenon. I was suspended in space, not knowing what was going to happen, tingling with anticipation and excitement. I took a bath while she waited in the bedroom. She took a bath and then joined me. We lay together on the bed as getting ready for sleep. It was almost dawn and getting light. She leaned over and kissed me. All of a sudden, our world shifted. I was in a life-changing moment. The rusty locks on my own heart clicked open. I felt a new freedom beyond the old hurt and pains of being different. I knew I had crossed a bright line to a new sense of being. I was 17. Some 40 plus years later, I had occasion to meet Joy once again. I was in Birmingham visiting from Massachusetts and touched base with some of the old softball crew. The woman who'd been second baseman gave a party at her home and invited the teammates that were still around. Joy was there. She had been married to a man but returned to the gay life and seemed happily involved with her long-term partner. We reminisced and I told her how our relationship, short though it was, had changed everything for me. She remarked that ringing me out was the worst thing she'd ever done in her life. I was stunned. How could we have spent so more than 40 years feeling so differently about the same event? For me, it was one of those thrilling and precious things that had ever happened. For her, it was the beginning of a time of grief and self-loathing about the act. Having kissed me, a youngster, although 17, she believed she had lured me into a lesbian life. At that time, homosexuality was thought to be a crime, a perversion, a sin, a dark world to be avoided at all costs. I tried to reassure Joy and tell her of the happiness she brought me. As she was caught in the shame of homosexuality, I don't think she believed me. During that weekend, I marched in a gay pride parade in Birmingham. My old friends refused to join me, afraid that they might be found out. I had marched in other parades and was from out of town. I knew I would be all right. I also knew what it meant to live in a closet, and I sadly understood why my old friends could not live openly as lesbians. And finally, my transition to Emory, from Emory to UMass. I'd been at Emory for 11 years and realized that salaries were very low. Faculty asked the deans if salaries would be improved, and the dean said no. One would have to get an offer from another university, and they would try to make a counter offer. Immediately prior to this time, I'd taken my first sabbatical at the University of Hawaii. I truly enjoyed the relaxed atmosphere, the beautiful weather, and the quick friendships that developed. The Hawaii experience led me to believe that other universities might be as inviting, if not more so, as Emory. I began to think seriously about applying elsewhere. Visitors from the National Science Foundation came to Emory to discuss research funding opportunities. I went to a meeting with them. A tall figure stood up across the room and came over to me. Norman Watt was a fellow classmate from graduate school. We had an immediate reunion. He had been at Harvard in the psychology department for several years and then moved to UMass. I asked if he knew of any employment opportunities. He said his department routinely kept a listing of possibilities, mostly at small colleges in Massachusetts. He said he would send me the list and asked me to send him my curriculum deal. I'd done well at Emory. I'd published extensively. My teaching evaluations were excellent. I was named an outstanding professor. I was promoted to associate professor in a timely manner and had tenure. I had external funding through a research grant from the National Science Foundation. Within a very few days after he received my curriculum vitae, Norman called to say, indeed, there was an opening at UMass, and invited me to apply. As it turned out, I was offered a position at UMass as a full professor in the Department of Psychology with an excellent salary. I conveyed this offer to my department chair at Emory. He immediately said they would do what they could to keep me. I was to be promoted, my salary increased, although not to the level of the UMass offer. I was torn. I had a rich network of friends in Atlanta. I was not thrilled about living in the North. However, UMass offered considerably more support and resources than Emory. Conflicted about the decision, I went back and forth between what to do about staying in Atlanta and moving north. I spent 4 years in Ohio acquiring culture to me when I was in graduate school. I did not look forward to going back north. I was not even quite sure where Massachusetts was. On my plane trip there for the visit, I was not surprised that we flew over New York City because I expected Massachusetts to be only slightly south of Canada in the Arctic Circle. I knew this would be a truly Yankee country. Yet the UMass offer was so extravagant in my eyes that I would refuse to turn it down. I could take my favorite graduate student with me and he would receive full funding. One faculty friend noted that with my increase in salary, I could afford to fly back to Atlanta as often as I wished. I made my decision to accept the offer from UMass and prepared yet again for a move north. Some scenes remain vivid in your memory no matter how many years pass. I recall with such clarity pulling out of the driveway of my Atlanta home and pointing the car north, afraid in what turned out to be the case, that I would never live in the South again. I often returned to Atlanta and to Emory to visit. I would spend time with friends and I loved seeing my old faculty buddies. I missed them terribly. I know I could have been happy in Atlanta if I'd stayed. However, I also recognized my life at UMass was much enhanced. Professionally, I flourished with wonderful graduate students, a continued involvement in research that I enjoyed that brought some acclaim, deep involvement in psychology associations, my continued love of teaching. Personally, I began to relax in being an out lesbian. Over these last 50 years, I've even come to appreciate living in Massachusetts, the most liberal state in the country. I have many friends, a lovely home on the lake, and I met my current partner with whom I've lived for almost 25 years.
Okay, so I have not seen any chat in the chat for any questions. So if you have a question for Bonnie, I'm going to look through here and see if anybody's got one. You can unmute and ask the question. If you're going to ask a question, please stay muted unless you're asking. That way we can all hear what people are asking. Anybody?
Or commenting. It doesn't have to be a question. Folks can simply comment on what they think.
It looks like Dorothy has her hand up.
Okay. Bonnie, thank you so much for sharing so much. And as your friend and neighbor for a long time now, I'm curious, when you came to UMass, at what point did you feel able to come out as a professional employee and be out? When did that happen at UMass?
Well, it was late in the Department of Psychology. I remember there was a survey that came in from the American Psychological Association, and it asked if there were gay and lesbian people on the faculty. And one of our faculty said, "Oh, we don't have anyone like that." And I sort of stood back and didn't volunteer to be the token lesbian. But I immediately found a softball team, and this was a feminist softball league. Lorraine and Cheryl were on it, and maybe some other folks here. Linda Pisano played in that league, and so not everyone was lesbian, especially because it was a feminist team. We were trying to encourage women of any persuasion to come out and play. But indeed, we began to party together. We began to sort of share our lives, and as you can imagine, UMass, well, maybe not UMass, but yeah, UMass, and especially the community, was very open, much more open to the gay life than had been true of Emory. I remember Emory students affirmed Vietnam. their motto was apathy. And when I came to UMass, I was walking through the campus center, and there was the whiff of marijuana in the air. You could join any organization, from communist to socialist to whatever. And it was just walking from a very parochial school with a lot of rich students to a real people's university. And again, I'm trying to get back to your question. I wasn't open, in the university particularly, until I found other folks that were gay and lesbian, and there were certain organizations and whatever. And it was sort of a gradual transition into finally feeling okay to be out.
Right.
And although I still, like, I had some gay material out on the coffee table, and a plumber came in, and I sort of turned it over so he wouldn't see it. I still have some funny feelings about being known immediately by strangers as lesbian. But did that answer your question?
Kind of. I was kind of curious what kind of year was it, like 1980 or? But maybe
I came here in 73.
73. Okay.
Yeah.
And Northampton was a bastion of lesbian folk, but even the first Northampton parades, gay parades, people
Right.
were wearing paper sacks over their heads so they wouldn't be identified.
Yeah.
Now they're, what, a couple of thousand come out, and they're kids, they're balloons, they're straight allies. It's a big celebration all day. But
Bonnie, it looks like we have a question from Bill Haley.
okay, where is Bill?
Right here, Bonnie. Well, I hope you can find me anyway. I don't look like I used to when I was your graduate student. But Bonnie, so I came to UMass in 1976, and Bonnie helped me get recruited at a time when they took students generally older than me. I was only 21, green, right out of graduate school from the Midwest. And, main thing I got is a comment that Bonnie always just taught by example. She didn't give speeches. She didn't tell us how much social justice was important. She just treated everybody like they were, equal, and stood up for what was right. Mm-hmm. And as a mentor, she always really looked out for me. I learned so much from her that I pass along to my own students now. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget, I went off to internship in Seattle, Washington, and my direct deposits didn't go through from the university. Mm-hmm. And Bonnie sent some money out of her own bank account to help me get through.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And in my career, she, pointed me to some APA committees and helped me get a leg up as needed. And so I'll just comment, I'm very grateful for that. And Bonnie never lectured about diversity and about how we needed to attend to it. But I know in my own work, I actually moved back to Birmingham. I moved to Birmingham when I was on the faculty at University of Alabama at Birmingham, and did research there that was very much concerned with minority aging and older Black caregivers in the community. And that's been a key theme in my career. And I think maybe it just seeped in a little. Bonnie encouraged everybody to treat each other well and to regard diversity positively. So Bonnie, looking forward to reading your book.
Well, thank you, Bill. I remember Bill and I used to go fishing on the lake that I live in, on the lake that I live on the shore. And it was a very special time. And it was wonderful to be with you, Bill. I always enjoyed it, whether it was in the classroom or on the lake.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back and forth between the chat and people raising their hands. Right now, the first one on the chat was from Nelda Hollander, and I see they've got their hand raised too. So why don't you go ahead?
Yes, this is John, and
Bonnie and I have a long history. She is a year older than me, but about 4 years more advanced academically because I spent 3 years in the Navy. So at any rate, she was a good support for me when I arrived at Emory University. Two instances that I think might be of interest to both to her and to some of you that know her. Early on, she told me of her sexual preference. And so at an early faculty party that we were both at, she appeared with this very handsome man. So afterwards I said, well, what's going on, Bonnie? I thought you were gay. And she said, well, he is too. And so we're both undercover. The other instance that she may remember is she was always wanting to do any athletics that was available, especially those that the males seemed to be enjoying. And I was a handball player, so she and so were several other of the male faculty. So she said to me one day, John, I want to play handball. And I said, okay, we'll go over to the court. Do you have gloves? And she said, no. And I said, well, we'll go anyhow, and we'll check out some rackets, and we can play racquetball in the handball court. And so I introduced her to a handball court. And those are just a few of the very fond memories I have of the few years that we've shared together at Emory University.
Wow. Yeah, I remember too that John and Nelda, were so kind to me along the way. And John also was a part of the group that one day we stood at the clinical meeting. Except for the clinical head, we went to a local restaurant close to the university and had lunch. And that's when we talked about our salaries being so low. And that's when Don Keesler left and I left, and maybe one or two others along the way. Yeah.
Bonnie, there's a comment in the chat. It's actually a question in the chat, and it's from Arlene. Marlene, would you like to ask it? You want to unmute, or do you want me to ask it?
Oh, it says, can you talk about the journey of being an out psychologist in the context of APA? Well, that was all very interesting. I certainly wasn't out when I joined APA, which was the year after I graduated from Ohio State with my PhD. But there were folks like Doug Kimmel, who's here tonight, others that, that dog is scratching at the rug here and interfering. I guess it's okay. But there was an association of gay and lesbian psychologists, which eventually became a division of the association. And then folks, began to gather as gay and lesbian psychologists. The division was formed back in about, Doug, would you know when it started?
1986.
86, and that was the year before I was president of the association. The other thing was that early on, the way I got involved in APA was the clinical section asked me to chair a committee on affirmative action and equal opportunity. And the aim was to get more women into the association. Well, we certainly got a lot more women. 3 out of 4 graduate students are women now. And we have a whole series of women presidents finally. But I added lesbian gay folk. And of course, we're looking for minority folk. But so it was just sort of gradual. It just, with the division, became a focus. And again, it was okay to be in that division. We had allies as well. And now it's a very powerful voice in the council. When I ran for president, I was very conflicted about what to say, what to do, because I knew that there was homophobia in the ranks and that they might interfere with the election. But I remember walking down the street with a student, and she said, "I don't know how you do it. When it's okay to be out, you're out. Otherwise, you know, you're just another psychologist to many folks." But again, I was very lucky, very fortunate to have the support of the minority community, the gay and lesbian community. And so my second run for president, I did win. And then there were more opportunities to open up opportunities for minority psychologists and for gay lesbian folk. But it was a slow journey at first. And then when the division came into being, gay lesbian activities just really took off. And it's still a very strong division in the association. Arlene has been president of the division. Doug has been president of the division. And now Arlene is on the executive council for the council team that kind of directs and helps the Council of Representatives get its work done.
And had very big shoes to fill. They were yours. I followed you in there.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, looks like we have questions from Shirley Bromley and Ellen Webster, and then after them we'll go to Mike Liu. So Shirley, go ahead.
Yes. It's wonderful to be with you tonight, Bonnie. And I met Bonnie when, yes, I was the preacher, but she showed up at the church that I was interim at in Belchertown. And then from there, I was an interim in North Amherst. She followed me there, and then in Amherst, and she followed me there. But when I moved to California, she said that was a little far for her to follow. So she didn't. But in reading your book, even though I knew you were Southern Baptist, I didn't know how well you knew your Bible. So I'm glad you never told me that. I would have been really intimidated about my preaching. So that was fascinating to me. The thing I wanted to talk about was your mother. I had a hard time liking your mother, and yet she's your mother. I would like you to express how you thought perhaps that you, having a mother who was pretty narcissistic, I would say. I mean, I shouldn't use psychological terms, but how did you become so caring about other people and compassionate? And was it because you met other people that helped you along the way, or do you even know how you could have turned out so much differently? So go ahead.
Yeah, I have to thank my mentors, and I hope I give them justice in the book. But the first mentor was, I was out on our driveway hitting a tennis ball against the wall, and Eunice Foster was riding a bicycle, and she was a woman of maybe in her 40s or 50s then. I don't really know, but she had white hair, and I thought of her as being old. She really wasn't old. And she asked if I wanted her to teach me tennis. And you know, I was of course delighted, and she did. She took me to the public park across the street from our home, and then eventually to the public parks tournaments, and eventually to the junior Whiteman team. But she was sort of the first that kind of took a look at me and thought or said that, you know, maybe she could do something for me, which in tennis really set me off for the rest of my life. I was still playing tennis. Probably the most important person was Louise Pope, my high school gym teacher. She was a straight woman, had always wanted children but didn't have any. And I think I became the daughter that she wanted. But she like I didn't get into the National Honor Society, and she got all upset and went to see the principal about why I didn't get in. And nobody had ever stood up for me before. And nobody had ever, taken my side and things. And at first, I had always hoped to go to college, but it looked like that there was not going to be any financial opportunity, any financial support, and then I wouldn't be going. So Ms. Pope said, of course you're going. And she sat down and she sent me to a scholarship weekend at little Alabama college, which has been her college. And I got a phys ed scholarship. And then the Lindley Heflin group, a group of women who had started their group in the First World War, rolling bandages for the soldiers, gave money or scholarships to needy girls that went to college at Alabama College all through the state of Alabama. So they gave me $250. My work in the dining room added a little bit to there. I got a job working in the dining room at 65 cents an hour. And so I was able to pay for my room, board, health care, and laundry with the 500 and tuition with the 500, which was $536 for the academic year. So the next mentor was one of the faculty there, Herb Weaver, who sent me off to graduate school, whether I meant to go or not. And he and I played tennis at the college, and 20 years later, I played with him at a psychology conference. I beat him again, but it was those outside folks, those adults, my school teachers, who were very, sort of noticed me and helped me along. And then, as I mentioned in the book, I was sort of raised by institutions, the church, school, the public parks, the sort of getting out into other communities than the working class house and home that I grew up in. That probably was more than you wanted to know, but it was the mentors that supported me, connected with me, fought for me, and led me into places that I never would have been otherwise. Incidentally, that little Lindley Heflin group, after I came to Massachusetts, they called and said, would you come and be our luncheon speaker? And of course, I would have done anything. I said, of course I'll come. I'll come to Birmingham and speak at your luncheon. I said, how many folks will be there? And they said 1,700. It was their fashion show for a fundraiser for the group. So I knew I could talk for 30 minutes. I was used to standing up in the classroom, but it was their fashion show, and what in the world was I going to wear?
Okay, Mike, you want to ask your question?
Sure. Brother Bonnie, I think that this is like a visual representation of a lot of your book. This is, this event has made your book into a movie.
Yeah.
And since everyone is introducing their connection to Bonnie, my husband and I moved out to Western Massachusetts from Boston about 8 years ago. We moved out at the beginning of July and somehow got invited to a July 4th party at Bonnie and Marjorie's. And it was love at first sight, and it's continued. What I wanted to ask, Bonnie, is in the book, you talked very eloquently about homophobia, about misogyny. You also talk about coming from a poor working class background. Could you speak to the classism, if any, that you experienced in academics?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So what do you want with
could you speak to any classism that you experienced in academics?
Well, the experiences were mine that I remember. But for example, when I was teaching at Emory, I was so afraid that I was going to mispronounce Arab, Polish. I just didn't speak the same language. And then when I was playing tennis, I was playing at the country club, which I certainly wasn't used to, coming out of the public parks. And I went home with a fellow tennis player, and she lived in this very lovely home in one of the suburbs of Birmingham. And I looked around, and there were oriental carpets on the floor, and there was lovely wallpaper, and we ate at this elegant table. And it was sort of the first time that I realized that there was classism, and that we were in different social status. And it finally hit me how shabby my own home was, compared to others. When I got to UMass, I was teaching one of my first classes was a big abnormal class. There was 300 students in it. When I started talking, several students got up and left. And I realized that it was because I was Southern, and that they just didn't have any interest in staying in the class. So there were those little examples back and forth that kept reminding me that of my intersexuality. It wasn't just gay and being woman, but also being from a working class status.
I'm not seeing any more questions here, so I'm going to ask if there's any more. If there isn't, while you're thinking about your question, I have a question. Bonnie, of course, I know your book backwards and forwards right now, but I'd like you to talk to us about how you made the decision and what led up to the decision to change from phys ed and go into psychology.
Oh, well, that's really easy. I remember I mentioned Dr. Ebert. He would take psychology students with him to the various institutions where he was doing assessment. So he would go to the School for the Blind, the School for the Deaf, the VA hospital where my Uncle John was a patient. And so for him to accompany him, folks had to practice IQ tests and other assessment instruments. So a close friend, Ginger Flowers, was a psych major, and she asked me to be a practice subject for her the intelligence test that she was trying to get used to giving. And I so much wanted to impress her. Again, in an IQ test, the quicker the more you know, the longer it lasts. And I think she thought this old phys ed major was going to have very short answers and go out very quickly. But she did what's called digit span. And what happens is the examiner rolls out a group of says a group of digits, and then you're supposed to reply with saying out what those digits were. So I in my mind's eye, I wrote them across the wall of the dormitory room we were in, and then I just sort of read them out. Well, I never did know what they gave me, what the IQ score was, but Dr. Ebert did call me in, and we began to talk, and he said, you enjoy physical education, but you're going to get old and tired, and have you ever thought about other majors? And I said, yeah, being an intellectual nerd, I said, philosophy. And he said, go and think some more. So I came back the next week and said, English. And he said, no. He said, I know about your interest in psychology. I've been practicing hypnosis in dorms and being really frightened when it worked. And he said, what about psychology? And I said, well, Dr. Ebert, I only know 2 psychologists. That's the faculty at the little school, and 5 undergraduate majors. And it seems like to me that psychologists are a little strange. And he said, Bonnie, you'll fit right in. So he sat me down and we went to, I didn't even know how to spell clinical, but he said, of course I would go into clinical because I could do research, I could teach, and I could see clients. And it offered me more opportunities than, say, pure experimental psychology. So we sat down and wrote letters to Dr. Roeder and to other folks, and I applied for 5 different schools. And interestingly, even though they were not taking women back then, I got into all the schools except Harvard, which I wouldn't have applied to except the other psychology faculty. Dr. Vickery came storming through and said, of course she's going to Harvard. So we applied to Harvard. They wrote back and said, Honey Strickland's record is very good, but her major, physical education, alas, and turned me down. Well, I had 90 hours of physical education. I had very little history, English, statistics, anything like that. But man, I could do campcraft and fly fishing and modern dance and whatever. So anyway, but I didn't get into Ohio State. I mean, I got into Ohio State, but I had no financial help. So we sat down and laboriously wrote a letter to Dr. Roeder, who was a very well-known psychologist then. And I got a letter, it said, I'd love to come to Ohio State. It was my first choice, but I would have to have financial aid. So I was going to play golf. I went by the campus post office and there was a letter from J.B. Roeder, Ox Hall, Ohio State University. And I walked out in the sunshine. I had that letter in my hand, I got an envelope in my hand, and I knew that would determine whether or not I would go to Ohio State, whether I would be in Ohio in the north. And I opened it. Now, if I had stayed in Alabama and taught full-time phys ed in a school, high school or elementary school, I would have made $2,800. Dr. Roeder offered me $2,400 for half-time research associate, to be a research associate. And so anyway, that did it. I stood there and realized that I could go and root for Ohio State University football, and that I could maybe learn to live in the north. And so I went off to Ohio State, knowing absolutely no one, which is the same thing as going to high school, knowing no one. And again, I tried out for a sorority. There was a sorority of graduate students, and I didn't get in. I had also tried to get into a little social group in my high school and didn't get in. So I don't know, why that occurred, but it did seem like that I was sort of on my own, and I didn't really know anybody, but I certainly became close friends with people in my class, including Norm Watt, who sort of brought me to UMass.
Okay. And so do you still root for Ohio State?
Yes, and they just lost to Michigan, which is their big
Yes.
They still ask me for money.
Oh, here we go. We got Linda Canfield raising her hand. Unmute.
Yeah.
I was a graduate student of Bonnie's in 1979. And what a thrill it is, Bonnie, to hear you talk about your experiences. And as I listened to you talking about the mentors and the teachers and the people outside your family who supported you and mentored you, it makes me think back to an experience when I was first a graduate student and my parents were coming up to visit me. And my parents really didn't know what to make of the fact that I was starting a PhD program. My father was an immigrant, had the equivalent of an elementary school education in Poland. And my mother was a first-generation American with a high school education. And I wanted to have them meet the chair of my department. And we drove over to your lake house. And you and your partner at the time greeted us at the car. You were wearing shorts and bikini tops and had cans of beer in your hands and invited us to join you. And my parents got a real glimpse, one they did not expect, in which they learned that psychologists are real people too. So I thank you very much for all the ways in which you supported and guided me and supported my family along the way. So it's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I look forward to reading every chapter of the book.
Well, I remember Norm, Linda's husband, needed a job, and I was working in the chancellor's office at that point, and we needed a secretary. And so Norm came to work with us, and these were the days of student demonstrations. So Norm, looking like a student, would go out and figure out what folks were doing, and then he'd come back and tell us. And so we knew when the building was going to be occupied and how many students were going to be there, and so on. But it was quite a journey that we had together.
Anybody else with questions? I keep scanning through, so if I missed you, feel free to unmute and talk to us. Oh, here we go, Bobby, unmute.
Okay, I just want to say, Bonnie, I so enjoyed reading your book. I got to know Bonnie through tennis, and I had no idea. Bonnie has never really shared her tennis expertise. I knew she was a darn good player, but I never knew of her background. So I so appreciate knowing more about what you went through and how you achieved what you did, even in tennis, besides all your wonderful academic accomplishments. But just getting to know you through your book and your tennis experience. Thank you, Bonnie. I really appreciate you sharing this with us.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, back when I was playing tennis, I was nationally ranked for the girls under 16. And then, of course, I got to be 17 and had to play with the big girls and was not nationally ranked again. But the tennis has been with me from the time Miss Foster came and took me off to the public parks. And I've still enjoyed playing with Bobby and other folks. They're all younger than me. But,
you still, you hold your court well. Don't say anything like that. I know you many times you pass shots past me. So
thank you. I wish that were true.
It is.
It looks like Shirley Brumley has another question.
Bonnie, you talked in your book about, well, transgenders, but also your own inclination as a young person. You maybe at another time you might have even transgendered yourself because you felt like you really you loved the male sports, and there were so many things like that. I just wonder if talk about that a little bit, but also the big brouhaha that's gone on about transgendered women not being able to, people not wanting them in sports. And what, could you comment on that and what you feel about that?
Yeah, well, when I was growing up, the term transgender was not even coined yet. We talked about transsexuals who cross-dressed, but there was, and of course there were tomboys or feminine tomboys or effeminate boys. But gender roles were very fixed. And I just, it never occurred to me. I mean, I wanted to do boy things and I enjoyed sports, but it never occurred to me that I would have more prerogatives. I mean, of course it occurred to me that I'd have more prerogatives as a male, but it never occurred to me that I wasn't a female. It just it just wasn't out there in anybody's consciousness. And but now again, my mom would never have let it be. But now I think that I would be much more aware of transgender folk and the whole movement of transgender folks changing gender. And so I don't know how I can't imagine, you know, what it would be like to be for me to be living now as a you know, back then I was a tomboy, but as you see in that book, my mama has me dressed up in a evening dress for a best forgotten piano recital, and it, you know, it's just assumed that I was a female and there were no other possibilities. I don't know if that answers your question, but God, things have changed so much in the 85 years that I've been on this earth.
And would you support transgendered women being able to play sports with, I mean, like being in the Olympics with other women? With women?
Yeah, I think so. I think if one considers one's identity as female or as a woman, that they should be allowed, encouraged, embraced in women's activities, including sports. It really saddens me to see these regulations being brought up about transgender women not being able to play sports and all sorts of testing for them and whatever. But I would think, I think we should sort of open sports to whoever is good enough to play.
Good. Thank you.
Mhm.
Not seeing anybody else. Anybody else want to unmute and talk to Bonnie? Not seeing anybody else?
Bonnie, this is Libby.
Yes, where are you?
I'm here.
It says iPhone 2, Bonnie.
Yeah, I
No.
was on the iPad and I had to leave,
Okay.
but it's good to see you. And
Well,
I hope
thank you.
we'll see you again soon. Maybe homecoming.
Yeah, well, Libby was, you were a year behind me, as I remember, in college,
Right.
Alabama College, and we
And I
lost
was from Birmingham.
touch for, well, what, 50 years, and then sort of refound each other at our homecoming back at Alabama College.
Right.
But Libby has been very important in the life of the college. She served on boards and advises the president, and also lost her partner of 53 years a couple of years ago. And so we sort of met under sad circumstances. But Libby is sort of an amazing person, and doing as well as one could hope after that long relationship.
Right. It's difficult at times. And you know that. I've talked to you about it.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I saw a hand up from Marilyn Patton. Marilyn, you want to unmute?
So
You need to unmute, Marilyn. Let me see if I can unmute you. Wait.
Wait, you're still muted, Marilyn. Can you see that little red thing under?
Unmute.
There
Can
you
hear me
go.
now?
Okay.
Okay. Bonnie, I just want to say that what you read is such a difference from what I read the first time I read your script. It's full of life and you've done a wonderful job and I'm proud of you.
Well,
That's it.
thank you. Marilyn was one of the people that read some of the early drafts and was so helpful in advising me. I remember you specifically wondered what in the world was locus of control. internal, external.
Right.
dimension. So we've developed a scale for it. Yeah. But I'd love to hear from some of the rest of you that haven't said anything. If
You can
would.
just unmute. I'm trying to go through. So if you have a question for Bonnie, just unmute and talk. They're being shy, Bonnie.
Go ahead. This is going to be Ellen talking instead of Shirley. Bonnie, since we got to know you when you made that momentous decision to hear a lesbian pastor at the church in Belchertown, and then you followed Shirley, and then you stayed at the church in Amherst for a number of years. After you left church many, many, many years ago, what can you say what that experience of being in church again was like for you?
Well, I was, was raised Southern Baptist. I was, baptized, found Christ, went to vacation Bible school every summer when I'd rather have been in Florida. But the church, like I said, the institutions raised me, and I do feel sort of grateful for the church in terms of giving me friends and giving me sort of a background and trying to understand the Bible and what it meant to be a Christian and all those sort of things. But once I got to college, I realized that a lot of what I was hearing couldn't be true. That we couldn't, that we weren't going to be, that there wasn't going to be an Armageddon, that there wasn't going to be all pulled up into heaven fully alive and whatever. And I went to a Unitarian meetings for a little while when I was in college, and that was pretty attractive. And then once I got out, went to graduate school and then to Emory, I just didn't do any church work at all, or didn't attend church. So I was at a Melissa Etheridge concert, and I was sitting with a lesbian couple, one of whom just died of COVID just a few months ago. But they said, "Have you heard there's a lesbian preacher, a lesbian minister in Belchertown?" Which I hadn't heard. And said, "You should come tomorrow." And I said, "Well, I will." I said, "What do you wear to church these days?" And they said, "What you have on will be fine." And so I did go, and I was just immediately attuned to what Shirley was saying from the pulpit. And as I said, I followed the North Church. I followed the First Church of Amherst. And I think what the big change was that Shirley did not take the Bible literally, which is what the Southern Baptists do, that everything in the church is the true word of God and so on. But Shirley brought a kind of spirituality that was more loving and more embracing than my early Southern Baptist background. And I don't know, Shirley was just very special in terms of her speaking, her compassion, her connection, her looking after us. And so it was just I can't even really explain how different it was to have come from such a very traditional conservative church into a more alive, socially involved, spiritual church. And that was under Shirley's leadership.
Thank you, Bonnie. That's very sweet. Thank you. Those are nice words to hear.
But I have to remind you that when you came that first time, I don't know if it was the second time you came, but we had that, it was right around 4th of July, and we sang "Oh Beautiful for Spacious Skies." I believe that was, and you told me right away, well, that was written by a lesbian. Remember that?
I do remember that, right.
That's the first I knew that. So I'm the one that got the education. And I'm talking too much, but I just wanted to say one more thing. And you have such a generous spirit, not only your hospitality, because Helen and I really know that, but also your knowledge. I mean, and you know, some people don't give away because they're afraid to do that. They're afraid they're going to lose something. But you give away, you give to us, and you've obviously given to your students and all your friends, because, and that's, you're teaching me even now how you get back from that, really. And I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bonnie, it's Melba. I need to leave pretty soon, but I just wanted to say how grateful I am to have crossed paths with you in so many different ways, primarily through the American Psychological Association. I was on the Council of Representatives when you were president of APA. And I don't know that you can appreciate how powerful it is to have us sitting out there and have a woman president, especially there were so many horrible things going on in APA at the time, and you handled it beautifully. You were strong and firm, and it was just such wonderful role modeling. And I became president of APA in 2011. And at the time, I was only the 13th women president out of 120 presidents of APA. And so you must have been what?
I think I was the sixth.
Something like that in 1986. Yeah, we used to elect women like every 20 years or something like that. It was just really ridiculous. It was terrible. And you and Florence Denmark and Dorothy Cantor are fortunately still alive and still president, still former presidents, and so caring and grateful and supportive and mentoring of those of us who, are willing to stick our necks out and run for APA president. And so I appreciate what you've done and continue to do. And so I was just thrilled when you wrote this memoir. And so I guess I wanted to, number one, to express appreciation for the role modeling and just your being out there. And secondly, I guess my question was, I think you talked about it a little bit in your book, but what made you decide to write this memoir?
I don't know. I know I started writing early, and back when there was so much concern about the American flag, about the Confederate flag, and whether it should be a part of anybody else's flag or whatever. I was invited by a Black literary journal to write an article, and I wrote what I think is the best thing I ever wrote, called A Faded Icon. It had to do with this flag here, and a lot of what I try to say in the book. And then I was invited to present something in a book called Lesbians and Lipstick, and I wrote Beauty and the Butch, and talked about what it was like to try to be feminized by my mother. And then I had another invitation. This is when some of the psychology journals were being established, new ones around lesbian gay information. And this one was called A Butch Among the Bells. And then one of them was redone out in the South. But I think it was sort of a flowering of interest in gay and lesbian lives and gay and lesbian experiences. So I started that early work. And then, as I said, Deb Green encouraged me to do more. So I started writing. And then a few years back, I did enroll in these seminars called Writing to Remember, and all of us were just amateurs, and but we would write and then read our memoir, our writings to the other members of the seminar. And folks were just very encouraging and never critical. If they had something they wanted to suggest, it was done in a very gracious, compassionate manner. And so I had to write and present 2 or 3 times a semester in those seminars. And so that sort of gave me some focus as to autobiographical writing. And it was sort of a collection of those that go into a lot of the book.
Mhm.
So I think that's how I got us sort of shifted. I continued to do research and continued to write technical journals and continued to do book chapters and things like that. Through APA, when I was president, the presidents often had an agenda that they wanted to accomplish while they were president. And mine was a task force on women in depression. And we basically found that twice as many women were depressed as men, something we had sort of known but hadn't really put out there so much. That made the front page of the New York Times. It was also during the time of the Iraq War. And there we were, the front page of the New York Times, women in depression, women are twice as likely to be depressed as men, and then we're bombing Iraq. And then the folks from the task force went on national TV with on the Oprah show, many other talk shows. And now I've forgotten why I even brought that up. But again, we were able to write outside of a journal format and put together a book called Women in Depression, which was one of the more publicly acclaimed products of APA back then.
Bonnie, it looks like the Hollanders have another question.
Okay. Yeah, you're muted.
Unmute. There you go.
Okay, this time it's Nelda. Hey, Bonnie, I just want to say a couple of things. One of which I think that you have evoked so much love in so many people through your love to all of us. And I thank you for that. And also, when we were at your home when you were at Emory, and there was a piano there, and I remember singing around it. Were you playing the piano for us all, relatively drunken faculty?
If I were playing, it was very poor playing, but I still have that piano. It's just off to my right here.
Oh,
we did have some interesting times at the house, and we probably did drink a little too much. In fact, it was drinking beer at lunch that got our courage up to go back and ask about our salaries. We also had a bowling team. Steve Nowicki was a part of that, and we had we won some little trophies and really had a good time playing.
I'm sorry, what team was that?
I don't know what, I don't know that we had a name or what kind of team we were or whatever, but I know we played for several years.
Okay. And John and I, every now and then when we see a reference to a swamp, we say to each other, Bonnie would say swamp.
Yeah, my family, I mentioned in the book, I grew up with 5 cousins close to my age, my brother's age. And they all went back to the swamps. They went back to Northwest Florida after that. Back in the South, you married a military man or you became a military man. And those folks went off to service and came back and all live around the old homestead there. and they're each on their marriage of some 60 years to their first wife. And I would have been there if life hadn't taken a different turn. If my mom hadn't married my dad and raised us in Birmingham, I'd probably still be back there in the swamps.
You've changed your pronunciation, my dear. You used to say swamp. Been in the north too long. We're both from Chicago, so we can say something like that. But anyway, you are so much loved by everyone who has ever known you, I'm sure.
Oh, well, you're so kind to say that. I feel, and I've really appreciated and enjoyed this particular session. To hear from folks whose lives have been intertwined in some way. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. Well, it looks like there's no other questions, and we can wrap this up. If you want to unmute and say bye to Bonnie, we'll end as you say. You can leave as you need to.
Bye, Bonnie. It was so good to see you.
Bye, Bonnie. Love you.
Bye, Bonnie. This is great. Thank you.
Bye, Bonnie.
Good
job, Bonnie.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Say hi to Marjorie.
Bye, Bonnie.
Yes, love you, Marjorie.
Bye.
Tuesday.
Bye, Bonnie.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Nice to meet everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for coming.
Bye, my dear Bonnie.
Take care. Let me do it.
Let's make it go away now.
Bye, Bonnie. Good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Zelda, thank you. It was wonderful to see you.
You too, dear.
Hope to see you soon.
So I was not going to leave.
I'm here, so this was wonderful. It was great to be part of it. So I'm gonna leave then. I'll talk to you later.
Okay.
Thank you, Leda, for helping her get all lit up and set up. Thank you.
Of course, it was great. Everything worked out so good.
Yes, it did.
Yeah. All right. So I'll talk to you all soon later.
Bye, Lida.
Thank you. Bye, Marjorie. Bye, Bonnie.
I mentioned earlier in Bonnie's introduction that she is an amazing woman. And I don't know if you all caught that, but when her reading, she mentioned her softball days and how she was coming back from playing softball, and on the radio, it came out that she had won the tennis championship of the state, a doubles earlier in the day. So she played tennis earlier in the day, won a state title, and then got in a car and drove for a softball game. Amazing. Any questions or comments? Just raise your hand, or
Jim Averill's got his hand up.
I don't see it. I see Abby. Abby, you can unmute.
I didn't actually put my hand up. I was going to put it in the chat, but I was going to ask Bonnie, how long before you really felt comfortable when you were in Massachusetts? How long did that take you?
Well, I was living two lives. On the faculty, I was not out, although I'm sure some folks suspected. Although other folks, there was a survey from APA that asked if there were gays or lesbians on the faculty. And one of our faculty said, "We don't have any of those." So, at least he didn't know. But where I really felt comfortable was playing softball with we had a feminist team, which is an oxymoron, I think, the feminist softball team. But they were almost all lesbians, although we did encourage women who had not played softball to come and join us and learn to play. I remember we would talk about how to process the game, and one of the new players, we said, you know, now when you're in the outfield and the ball comes to you, you have to call it. And she said, oh, that sounds like too much of a commitment. So we had young and inexperienced softball players, but we really had a good time. And we would run beer to the games, even though we weren't supposed to, and party afterwards. Oh, they reminded me of an early softball team that I had been, that I had met basically when I was about 14 or 15. My mom said I could no longer play with the boys, and we were playing football and other games in the park across my home. So being an enterprising youngster, I simply walked over to the baseball fields, and there was a group of softball players, all mostly lesbian. And they took me under their wings. They let me be their bat girl. They never mentioned anything about being gay or being lesbian. They were very competitive. I would keep score. And one night we came out, and an opposing team had slashed the tires on my car, on their cars. And we followed them to a restaurant where they were drinking beer and eating supper, and called them out, and basically two of the women, one on our team and one on their team, began to fight. And our first baseman put keys between her fingers and walked around the two who were fighting, and you know, and keeping anybody else out. Well, I wanted to fight. I wanted to be in the fight, but couldn't. And then we heard the sirens coming, and we escaped while the other team had to go back into the restaurant to retrieve their belongings. But these women were mostly faculty, mostly from factories, and had keys on their belts, but they were very, very kind to me. And it was softball and tennis that I played. I still play tennis, and I played all my life, and sports have been a very special part. But anyway, I'm going off here. Again, there was the whole life with lesbians, and then there was faculty life, and they didn't really overlap that much. But finally, I was in a van. We were going to some sort of meeting. There was a bunch of psychology faculty, and they asked if I would teach a course in health psychology. And I said no, but from out of somewhere I said, but I would teach something on lesbian studies. And well, you thought I had endowed a building. The faculty got all excited, and the faculty council approved the course. And so I did teach lesbian psychology, and there was no way that folks wouldn't know that I was gay. So I sort of came out to my straight friends sort of quickly, whereas my long-term lesbian friends I had been with for a long time. So anyway, it was kind of mixed, but compared to Emory, it didn't take long. Emory was a very parochial and very wealthy school, even though our salaries were low. And the Emory students affirmed Vietnam, and their motto was apathy. And I came to UMass and walked through the campus center, and there was the way for marijuana smoke, and you could join the communist group, a socialist group, or almost any group you could imagine had a banner up, and it was real People's University. And so I was there from 73 until I retired just last fall from teaching, and they've been very, very good to me through all these years. And finally, I still feel a little funny about coming out to folks that I don't know, not knowing what their perceptions might be. But with this book, the Southern Lesbian Journal, you know, everybody's gonna know. So I guess I must relax into it.
Just a reminder that if you do have a question, what's really easy is if you go to the bottom of your screen on the right and hover your mouse over there, there's reactions. There's a button called reactions. You click on that and you'll see a raise hand bar. So just click on that and it'll come up. It'll notify me that you've got a question or comment. In the meantime, while you're trying to find that, if anybody has a question, I'm looking for Jim and Judy Averill.
I was wondering, Bonnie, did you ever regret leaving physical education for psychology? I read today that they hired the coach for Notre Dame, Brian Kelly, to LSU for $1 million. And that was just one of a number. You don't make that in psychology, I don't think.
Well, yeah, what?
He said, do you regret having gone from phys ed to?
No, not really. I enjoyed being a phys ed major, and I've enjoyed being in sports for all my life. No, I don't really have any regrets. I recall that I was a happy phys ed major, and there was a psychology faculty, Herb Eber, who would take undergraduate majors in psychology on trips with him when he did assessments out at the Veterans Administration Hospital where my Uncle John was a patient, School for the Deaf, the School for the Blind, the psychiatric hospitals. And so to get ready to accompany him on these trips, students had to practice the intelligence test. So a good friend of mine, Ginger Flowers, asked if I would take the test. And so I was very eager to impress her. And I remember there was digit span in which she says a list of digits, about 7 or 8, and then you're to repeat them. And in my mind's eye, I wrote them on the wall of the room that we were in, and then I could kind of read them out. Well, they never told me what my scores were, but Dr. Ebert called me in and said, I know you enjoy physical education, but have you thought about other majors? And I said, well, being an intellectual nerd, I said, philosophy. And he said, go and think some more. I came back in, this was his way of getting me into psychotherapy, I think. Came back in next week and said, English. And he said, I know you're interested in psychology. I've been practicing hypnosis in the dorms, completely frightened when it seemed to work. And I said something to the effect about I didn't really know many psychologists. I knew him and Dr. Vickery, who was the entire Department of Religion, Psychology, and Philosophy. And I knew the 4 or 5 undergraduate majors in psychology. And I said, but it seems to me that psychologists are a bit strange. And he said, Bonnie, you'll fit right in. So I did switch to, I didn't really change my major. I graduated 90 hours of physical education, from camp craft to fly fishing, some tennis and golf. And Dr. Eber sat down and we applied to several different schools, and he said, you should apply in clinical. And I said, clinical, what's that? And he said, well, you'll be able to do research, you'll be able to teach, and you'll be able to see clients if you wish. It just offers more opportunities. So I applied and got financial aid in several schools, but I really wanted to go to Ohio State, or he wanted me to go to Ohio State, and which was arguably one of the best, the best clinical program in the world. But I didn't get financial aid. So he and I laboriously wrote Dr. Roeder, who was the chair of the admissions, and told him the situation. And I was going out to play golf one day, and I went by the post office, found a letter, walked out in the sunshine, and it said from J.B. Roeder, Arts Hall, Ohio State University, Columbus, Ohio. And I knew that I was holding my future in my hand, that this would determine whether or not I would go to Ohio State. So I opened it, and he had offered me a research assistant position at $2,400 for half-time. If I'd stayed to teach in Atlanta, or in Georgia, rather, no, Alabama. I was in Alabama. I taught later at Emory in Georgia. But if I'd stayed as a high school teacher in Alabama, I would have made $2,800 for a full-time position. So I don't really regret making that change from phys ed as a senior and in college to going to graduate school and becoming a psychologist eventually at Ohio State.
I see Gail has a question.
Yeah, indeed. Hey, Bonnie, you are a rock star. No doubt about it. Woohoo!
Thank you, Gail.
I'm very curious about your writing process, Bonnie. So it's a two-part question. One is, where did you start when you started writing this memoir? I know what you did with your life cycle at the book, but was there any particular place you started? And then the second question is, was there any one chapter you wrote where you learned something very new about yourself?
Yeah, you'll probably have to remind me of that second question. I'm sorry, you had to remind me of the first question. When did I start? Oh,
I was curious.
Writing the autobiographical stuff. Well, Bev Green published some of the early, almost parts of the beginning of this book. And from that, I got an invitation to write. This was when whether or not to fly the Confederate flag was, that argument was raging through the country. And I got invited to write a piece for a Black literary magazine called Hallelujah. And I actually wrote about the flag and what it meant to me and whatever. And that was sort of the first time I sort of bridged out from research articles. And then other folks invited me to write for some of the lesbian journals that were, again, more autobiographical. So I had a chapter out called Beauty and the Butch in Lipstick Lesbians was the name of the journal, or was the name of the issue for the Journal of Lesbian Studies. I also had a chapter called A Butch Among the Bells. So that sort of began, but it began really through Bev Green encouraging me to publish more autobiographical writings, and there were some opportunities. Now, your second question?
So I was curious to know if in your writing during all the time that you were writing, was there one chapter or maybe there were a couple that really kind of, you learned something new about yourself or some new insights? Anything?
I think in the early chapters of the book, what I learned about myself was how much more at home I felt in Florida with my cousins and my grandparents and the very extended family there. I think that was one of the most important things I learned. And I wonder, what had happened if I'd been able to grow up there. I certainly wouldn't have had the opportunities that I had in the Birmingham public schools. And where they let me play tennis on the boys' tennis team and take shop and do all sorts of boy type things, even in the 50s back in the South. I sort of later in the book, I think I learned that how important friendships and relationships were for me. And I've always felt incredibly loyal to early friends and early faculty. But of whatever I've done, it's been the connection with other folks that have made all the difference. So many of you are sitting here tonight. I really, really appreciate you being here.
It looks like Heather's got a question or a comment.
Heather's my niece. Where is she?
Hi.
I see you.
And I don't know if you addressed this later in the book. I've only gotten halfway through, but was there a moment or a reaction from your mom or from your brother when they learned that you were gay?
My mom was always trying to, your grandmother was always trying to feminize me. She herself dwelt entirely in the heterosexual world. And as I came into teenage years, I think she, got particularly perturbed about my boyish activities. As I said, she told me I couldn't play with boys anymore. But her reactions, she was sort of unpredictable anyway. I never quite knew if something I had done would irritate her or frustrate her. But until just a few years ago, she was still hunting somebody for me to marry. And she would find these most improbable characters and introduce us. But she always had hopes that I was straight, and we never really talked about it. There was a big gay gathering in Washington, and a well-known actress stood up and said something about being gay, and my mom and I happened to be watching it, and she said, "I hope you don't do anything like that." So she must have known, at some level, but she was so good at denial that it just never became a topic of conversation.
Yeah. What about with your brother, with Dad?
I don't really, you're talking Bud, your father.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't really know. He, it was never really talked about. And finally, when I was with my first long-term partner, he became very fond of her and very accepting of our relationship. But he's a very staunch conservative, and I would imagine early on his feelings about homosexuality were pretty negative, but he seems to have blossomed a bit. And as far as I'm concerned, he's very loving and very kind, and we get along very well now. And he seems to have sort of accepted my lifestyle, and we just don't discuss it very much.
Yeah.
Okay, and we have one from Richard, and then we go to I'm sorry, let's go Marshall first. He came in first, and then to Richard.
Okay, thank you. Well, I was one of the people that Bonnie left back at Emory when she went to UMass. And I think it puts me in a special position because I can tell you and her what happened after she left. I think sometimes when people leave a place, they assume it's just there and it's without them, and their effect may or may not have been felt. But Bonnie's effect continues to be felt at Emory, almost a half century later. She said that when she was at Emory, Bonnie, you said that when you were at Emory, you had done all sorts of things. You were administrator, and you were appointed, as I remember, if I'm remembering correctly, Dean of Women. This was back in the days when there was a Dean of Men and a Dean of Women. And you said, I'm not going to be the Dean of Women. I'm going to be the Dean for Women. And you had the title changed. They actually changed it. And this is something that has stayed, certainly, but you would now, if you come to the psychology department at Emory, you would find several things. One is that your name is known because Emory proudly says, we have had 2 women presidents of the American Psychological Association. The first was Bonnie Ruth Strickland. The second was Nadine Castlow, who was president not too long ago. And so your name is known and is featured in the history of our department. And certainly in my memory and in Steve Nowicki's memory, you were the key to the beginning of our career. And that's something that certainly has stayed with me and has stayed with him. But I would like you to know that the Emory department has changed radically, as has the Emory campus. We both came to a place that was very conservative, as you said, very provincial. The current chair of our department is a gay woman. The incoming chair of our department is a gay woman. Probably 20% of our faculty is gay or lesbian. The student body is very broad and diverse. It is a very different place. And if I needed to look back and say, well, where did all this start? I think it started with you, at least in our department. Because I can tell you, if I need to go back and remember the faculty who came through, I've forgotten many of them. But I don't think our department memory has forgotten you.
Wow.
So it's a joy to see you. And we always felt terrible that you went to UMass. We understood that you went to UMass. We understood why you went to UMass. And we stayed in contact with you. And I remember, I think it was one of the first meetings of the Association for Psychological Science, which was then called the American Psychological Society, if I remember correctly. They changed it from one APS to another APS in order not to need new stationery. So, and you were the president of the organization, and I remember being there at the first meeting in Washington D.C. and hearing you open up this organization that has now become the primary force in academic psychology, certainly.
Well,
so I know that you're modest, but you know, I need to brag on you.
I
learned to say that in the South because I'm from New Jersey. Only a Southerner would say brag on you.
I never really was president of the American Psychological, the American Association for Psychological Science. I was on the early boards, and we wrote the bylaws for that association here in my house. But you know, I think I was a big part of the founding, but I was never president. I was president of the American Psychological Association.
Sure. Yeah. Good memories, Bonnie.
When I was in Emory, I was trying to lead a straight life, and when we'd have socials or parties, I would always show up with a handsome man on my arm, but he was always a gay man. And I remember before I left, there was a small supper at the chair's home. I believe Marshall was there, Steve Nowicki was there, John Hollander was there. And I came with a good-looking gay man. And the chair sort of began to ask about him, said, you know, so where did you go to school? He said, Penn and Wharton School of Business. And he said, oh, what do you do? He said, well, I'm in retailing. And all of a sudden, it dawned on the chair and maybe some others that he was the son of one of the owners of a very large department store in Atlanta. And the next morning, the chair called me in and said, we really enjoyed last night. And we loved your new fellow. We think he's very impressive. And of course, he didn't know that he was a gay man at that point. Otherwise, he might have thought very, very differently.
Okay, Richard.
Yep, I just wanted to support what Cindy has said about Bonnie's modesty. I've known Bonnie in Hawaii, in Massachusetts, and Greece, and I just having read your book, I was overwhelmed by all your accomplishments in Hawaii. We said, you're somebody, you know? And again, knowing you personally and reading your book, I've always been touched by your humanity. And Joan and I, Matt and Miley, want to send our love and hugs to you. That's all we have to say.
And it looks like Ellen just raised her hand. There you go.
Hi, Bonnie. So I have to leave in a few minutes, but I just had to get this in. So first of all, I was so honored to have been asked to review your book, to write a review. I loved the book. I just loved it. I never took so long writing a review because I had to say exactly the right words, and I kept writing to Cindy, Cindy, can I have one more day? Anyway, the other thing I want to say is that you also may not remember this, but you wrote an autobiographical piece for a book that I edited on retirement. It was called, oh God, what was the name of the book? Retiring but not shy. Feminist psychologists create their post careers. And Bonnie, you wrote one of the best chapters in that book because you wrote about flunking retirement, and I just loved it. Bonnie retired, for those of you who might not know, I think she retired for 3 weeks and then went back to work, something like that, something really funny. And it was so inspirational for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I took formal retirement in 2002. And as Ellen says, I really flunked. And luckily, I was able to continue teaching in the Honors College for the next 20 years. And I did really finally retire, I think this time for good, last fall.
I don't see any other hands raised. Anybody? Is somebody, Barry, are you waving at me? Yes, Barry, unmute.
Okay, I'm ready. Finally, one of the most impressive things that I have noted you've done is your article or letter to the Times expressing your feelings around the stars and bars and how you needed to express some element of Southern culture and your identification with it during a time when people want to erase some powerful icons. I wonder if you'd be willing to comment.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was having a little trouble hearing. What did you say toward the end? Barry?
Go ahead, Barry. You want to try again?
Would you comment? Yes. Bonnie, would you comment on your letter to the New York Times talking about your relationships to the stars and bars, to the Confederate flag? You're very courageous.
You wrote an article to the New York Times about
No, I don't think that was me, Barry. That wrote to the New York Times. I've written to the
It was a letter.
Anything.
tell him that his voice, the speaker on his phone.
Yeah, I'm just having.
It sounded to me that it was a letter to the editor that you had in the New York Times, something about the stars and stripes, and it was courageous of you to put the letter in.
It was the stars and bars. It was the Confederate flag.
Stars and bars. Sorry.
Yeah, but I didn't send anything to the New York Times.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else raising hand?
I just wanted to say hello to Vicki, who came in after some folks in the waiting room, and is delighted to see you here. Vicki was a graduate student here at UMass some years ago, and has become a very important figure at UCLA through the years. Does a lot of work on a lot of research on health disparities as well. And Marietta Pritchard is one of my tennis buddies, and really glad to see you here. And she's also written a couple of books that have been very well received. Joan Grenier is here with the owner of the bookstore. I think I mentioned that earlier. Jim Averill, did you have a question earlier? Jim? Did you have a question earlier or a comment?
Are you talking to me, Bonnie?
Yeah, I thought you were trying to say something earlier in the.
No, but I would have a follow-up on the last question. Whether you wrote a letter to the editor or not, what is your tie to the South right now in terms of affection?
My ties to the South?
Yes.
I I think I don't really have any. I occasionally will see old students or old friends. And I did have a home in Mexico Beach, Florida until Hurricane Michael swept it away. And I don't know whether Tammy Owens is still on, but I do have some close friends from that community and try to get down there when I can. I haven't been able to, because of COVID for the last couple of years. So I still have some, some friends there. And then my family is in South Carolina. I see them. But other than that, unless I'm at...
I'm thinking more about Southern culture. There are very good aspects to Southern culture that I don't assume that you would want to divorce from. But what are they? What are those aspects? Other than friends and things like that.
Oh, the emotional ties? Yeah, just sort of sometimes thinking back to what it had been like if I had stayed in the South. A great appreciation for the extended family in the South, especially the cousins that I grew up with. But mostly again, I love hearing from our students from there and really enjoyed things from old faculty here. So there's personal connections that I feel, personal connections that I feel very strongly about. I'm so happy to be out of the South, and I'm a political junkie, and I'm really torn between what are the good things about the South and what are the more negative kinds of things. And I must confess, these days I found less positive attractions than otherwise. I don't know if that answers your question, but just my emotional ties to certain people there that I've known for so long.
Bonnie, it looks like we have a hand raised by Roger.
Roger?
Yeah, it's actually Roger and Mary in Santa Cruz. And, even though we are both psychologists and longtime friends of Bonnie, the funny thing is when we're together with Bonnie, we don't talk about psychology a lot because Bonnie is such an athlete. And hearing her talk about going back, all the way back to her days on the softball team and the tennis team when she was a teenager, it just reminds me what a great athlete she still is. That when we go on adventures with her, it's hard to keep up with her. She can take off up the mountainside or ford a river or, sleep in a tent anywhere in freezing temperatures. And, Bonnie, surely you remember Burma in the 90s when nobody was going to Burma or Vietnam, and the guys chasing us in a horse cart trying to sell us rubies.
Sell Bonnie rubies.
Yes, rubies. And the crowning adventure of them all, Upper Mustang. You ask, where is Upper Mustang? It's above Lower Mustang. It's the uppermost tip of Nepal, reaching into the Tibetan plateau. And we went there for a festival, didn't we, Bonnie?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, she out walks and out hikes and out climbs all of us. And, so I haven't gotten the book yet, and I can't
wait to read it because her athleticism and her physical strength and just sheer boyishness is so much a part of who you are, Bonnie.
I'm sure slowing down now. I just turned 85. Feel it.
Well, you know, I'm sure you can still keep up with the best.
Certainly keep up with us.
Yeah, that's for sure. We're slow down a bit too, Bonnie.
Are there any other questions or comments? Just feel free to unmute and speak up. I see Patricia Ricketts has posted an emoji, a heart emoji. Do you see that, Bonnie?
Thank you.
Okay, well, if that's everything, if there's no other questions, Alan has just given a heart emoji too. You can all unmute. You can all unmute and say bye to Bonnie, and we'll end the meeting.
Bye, Bonnie.
Bye, Bonnie.
Yeah.
Bye, Bonnie.
Bye,
Bonnie. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Coming, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Lonnie. Congratulations on your book.
Matt and Miley send
Hi, Marge.
Yeah.
Merry
Thank
Christmas.
Hello, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Hi, Marge.
Marjorie.
Look forward to reading it.
She's my baby.
Bye, Bonnie.
Bye.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Bye.
It's been wonderful.
Bye. Bye.
Aloha.
You didn't hear Matt and Miley send their love. Matt and Miley send their love to you.
Dick is telling you somebody's.
Oh, Matt and Miley want to send their hugs and loves to you.
Okay, now I can hear it.
Matt and Miley.
Matt and Miley want to send their love and hugs to you.
Yeah. I don't know.
Bonnie, I'm going to make an appointment to come back so you can sign the book for my daughter.
Oh, okay.
I'll get it.
Love to.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Kathy. And Morton, did Morton make it?
Yeah, so looks
Oh my
like
God.
it.
Yeah,
Martin's
I'm
in
here.
Denmark.
Morton, hi Morton.
Yeah,
Hey,
he's in
hey.
Denmark.
Did you catch it all?
I think I got in a little late, but most of it.
But you're here. That's like
Yes.
very cool. Awesome. What time is it in Denmark? 2 o'clock in the morning or something?
It's 1 o'clock.
So Morton is Kathy's husband.
And they're our neighbors.
Oh.
They're both our neighbors, yeah. Yeah. And we adore them. That was great.
It's lovely.
That was really nice, Cindy. Thank you so much.